Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about a topic that needs to be covered because it's more nuanced than it sounds, and that's the idea that we need barbell rows or that barbell rows can build your deadlift. And I've even promoted those ideas, and you know what? They are correct in the right context. But I just saw an article on one of the pages that I'm in, one of the groups I'm in online. Member of the group gets his articles published, and he was explaining, rows can build your deadlift, they can increase your deadlift, and it made me realize that we need to put that in context. And one of the things that most people will notice is that I go through phases where I only do chin-ups, pull-ups, and deadlifts, all at high volumes, and I don't do rows. And I've done other phases in the past where I did a lot of rows, and say deadlift volume is limited to like ME work, DE work. And I think that creates confusion for people. And here's why. And I've even said, well, yeah, you can build your deadlift doing good mornings and rows, right? Those can be the staples that build it. But you can also build your deadlift by deadlifting. And what we need to understand is these two don't mix and match. Hey, it's not hey, we can just do all of it, because that's not how it works. So what I'm going to say here is, if you're using rows to build your deadlift and you're using some other sort of much lighter hip hinge, this only works when you're doing a very low specificity setup. Okay, it can work very well on, say, conjugate if good mornings aren't too heavy in theory, and you're only doing speed pulls, right? You're only doing speed pulls. You're not doing any moderately heavy deadlifting other than, maybe every second or third max effort workout. Okay, so when you look at it from that perspective, okay, yeah, rowing really works. It can really help build your deadlifts, particularly things like rows off the floor. All right, it works great, but why does it work great? Well, because usually if you're doing conjugate in that manner, what's going on? We're not hammering our low back that hard. It's not getting fatigued. We only are doing the LMDE, and then we use supplemental work to hypertrophy all the muscles involved. And so why does the row help there? Because at rowing, we are holding an isometric hip hinge. We're holding an isometric hip hinge while then pulling with our back. And it builds tons of the support musculature for the deadlift. It basically reverses the situation of the deadlift. All right, on a deadlift, what are the primary movers? They tend to be the posterior chain and quads, with a bias towards the posterior chain, obviously. Your whole upper and middle back is contracted isometrically on the deadlift. They're support muscles, they're stabilizers. In other words, they need to be strong to keep you in the correct bar path, to put you in the right positions. And so watch me deadlift, you guys can see that, right? Lats are retracted, scapula back. So the muscles we use in a row are all being used isometrically. Even the biceps, right? They're being used, just being held, stretched isometrically. They're not really hit an isometric contraction, but they're being stretched. Everything else is being locked in and then having a stretch put on it while it's held isometrically. And then we use the whole posterior chain to move it. Glutes, hamstrings, and to a lesser degree quads. Quads really just break you off the floor. All right, and then low back a little bit. All right, when we go over to a standing row, that completely flip-flops. What's now being held isometrically? The posterior chain, because we're holding a hinge, and a deadlift is a hip hinge. We're holding that hip hinge isometrically, and then we're dynamically using all the muscles as primary movers that were stabilizers on the deadlift. So we build them up, and we're training them to contract when in a hinge position. So that's why it helps build a deadlift. All right, and as long as you do a little bit of deadlift practicing, and you then build the posterior chain up, what happens? Hey, everything's great. right? Our deadlift should go up. You build a pretty big deadlift that way. But you're going to have to then do hypertrophy work for the glutes, the hamstrings, all that stuff. Okay, that's where the good mornings and stuff come in a system like that. All right, what happens if we're doing a lot of deadlifting? Like, what do you see me doing in these clips? This is from me doing a lot of deadlift volume. You know, at least 6 sets every week. Depending upon which week these clips are from. This is stuff where I was doing 6 to 8 work sets of deadlifts a week. All right, here's the problem. You can't row and do that. Not if you're respectably strong on the deadlift. Well, why? Because your low back is fatigued. All right, our lower back is really fatigued from that. And if you try to do standing rows of any type, you may overtrain your low back. I would limit low back training to, you know, stuff like reverse hypers, maybe some good mornings if you can tolerate the volume. But you can't row. You can't row in those situations. And that's why chin-ups and pull-ups shine so well on a higher specificity, higher volume deadlift method. Because chin-ups and pull-ups, they don't work the low back. They don't fatigue it. They put it in traction. In fact, if they're weighted, they're pulling on it. It's pulling on your low back. It's restorative. And I'm big on traction-based work. That's one reason I love chin-ups and pull-ups. One reason I do reverse hypers, glute ham raises, all these things. Hanging leg raises. All puts traction on the low back, helps us recover from if we're doing a lot of deadlifting, especially if we're doing good mornings and stuff, and we need all that traction work. But we can't afford to row. Our low back can't handle it. Then people say, well, if you're not rowing, then what about upper back? Well, we're deadlifting. That covers that. So pull-ups actually work a lot of the upper back to a great extent. So do chin-ups. People can argue they don't, but they do. We could say maybe not quite as well as a row. Okay, I'll agree with that. What about when the deadlift's added in? Well, the deadlift will bridge that gap. So if you, let's say you're doing like what I like to do, a lot of deadlifting, a lot of chin-ups. Well, your upper back is going to be pretty well covered between those two. Upper back, we're talking traps, rhomboids, all of those things. So then in that case, you use, to build your whole middle back, and then to some extent the upper back, you just use traction-based movements. Again, pull-ups, chin-ups. All right, they'll get the job done. Build a big upper back with all that if you're doing all the high volume pulling. So these are different approaches. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.